Okay, let's start meeting. First of all, for the oral status, I think all of the members are working on 1.14, and the original plan for the FD is tomorrow. Now we want to delay it for 1 or 2 weeks, and that is the overall status. And for some personal update, myself is working on some PR reviews, and I have also completed the design for data microservice, so it is ready for review. Please just look at that offline. That's from my side. And next one, Daniel, please. Okay, let's give Daniel for now. Xin, please.
This week, I will be on duty for the weekly support, and the next one is the data-only restore discussion. I draft a Google Doc. Guys, please take a view. And that's all.
Okay. And Shubham, please.
Yeah, last week on Thursday, I think the extension of volume policy design got merged. Working on the implementation, we are stuck at some small issues. Maybe I'll create the pull request today or tomorrow. Other than that, I have one discussion topic. We can go through the issue later after the status updates are done.
Okay. And me, please.
I've done a fix about the data mover cancel bug. It's from my side.
Okay, thanks. And Scott, please.
Yeah, so got the PR out on Monday for the multi-threaded backup redesign. There were several PR comments. Lyndon and Anshul both had some reviews in. I have responded in detail to all of those comments. I just kind of listed in the meeting notes here some highlights. If you haven't seen the responses yet, look at those in detail. But kind of what I added to the meeting is a quick summary. Basically, one of the issues identified was, the concern was raised around the fact that we have to fall back to the V2 behavior if not all the plugins are V3 plugins. And what that means is that if you have some third-party plugins that don't implement this new method, then Velero has no way of knowing whether there are additional item relationships that aren't captured. So if we were to try to break those up into blocks, item blocks, and do that in a multi-threaded way, we'd run the risk of running things in parallel that needed to be done sequentially. So we really do have to fall back. But the good news is all of the Velero plugins that are supported by Velero itself are now in the main tree because we pulled CSI in. So those will all be upgraded as part of this process. We'll need a document for users, what the changes are and how they can update their plugins to make use of this. But an example of that would be, if, for example, the pod plugin didn't implement this new method, and we just kind of went ahead with it without that, we wouldn't capture the fact that the PVC belongs to the pod, which means you might have, if you have two threads going, one of them is backing up the pod, one is backing up the PVC, that's going to break your hooks. So we really need to limit this to cases where all the plugins are V3 or later, which the effects would be users that have third-party external plugins, for example, OADP with the OpenShift plugin. If those plugins don't get updated, then they wouldn't be able to make use of the new functionality. Everything would work just like it is now, but they would need to upgrade those plugins to get the full functionality for that to work.
Yeah. So that means we still need to keep most of the current code for the BIV2, and then we add another bunch of code for.
Well, it's not so much the current. Basically, what happens is, and this is all in the design. You can see how it's laid out. Basically, the way we handle that is if we're falling back to BI v2, that means that when we generate because we iterate over this this new get additional items to generate this item block. So if we don't have BI, if we go back to BI v2, then the item block is just going to have a single item in it. But that's okay, because we're also going to have a single worker thread. So the fact that we don't have the blocks together is okay if we're only doing things single threaded, because the actual sequence is going to fall back to what the current design. We're still using the new code. It's just that the item blocks have one item in each block, and we only have one thread. So we're not falling back to the old workflow. We're still using the new workflow, but we're limiting the new workflow to mimic the old behavior. So we're not going to have a problem when, in terms of the things being backed up out of order. So we're not going to, everything goes through the new workflow. It's just that if we have plugins that don't correspond to the new API, then we're going to treat every single item that we get from the item collector as a single item block. And we're going to, once we hit phase 2, we're only going to have it's going to behave as if the user had selected one worker thread. So we'll have to have a warning on the Velero log saying, we have V2 plugin, BIA plugins, so we're only running one worker. That way, because the current Velero doesn't have these item block concept, but it works because we backed everything up sequentially. So the actual sequence of backing up in this fallback mode will be the same, but it's still going to be using the new code. But I mean, we still have the BIA v2 and v3, code in there, just like we still have v1 in there as well. I mean, we have the adapters, so that right now v1 has an adapter so that a v1 plugin can work as a v2 plugin. In this case, that adapter goes in the other direction. If you have v3 plugins and v2 plugins mixed, we're going to treat everything as a v2, so we use that v2 adapter, which basically just means the new function won't be called.
Yeah, I didn't go through all the comments right now, but I think currently the concern is like the 2 points. The first point, like we need to have all the BIs as BI v3 in order to use. For example, if I have a BI v3 and I want to use that only, I cannot do that because I need to have all the BIs as BI v3.
Well, you can use it. You can't use it in a multi-threaded way. We're going to have to kind of limit the functionality. So we're only going to have one worker thread. The worker pool is going to only have one. So we're not going to be backing up, say, 5 or 10 items at one time. Item blocks are going to be limited to the single items. So we're using all the new structures. It's just that we're not going to have those additional things added into it. So the functionality in terms of what the end user sees falls back to the way it works now, but it's still using the new code flow. Yeah, but I cannot use take the advantage of BIV3. Like I only have some of the backup that run in some of the resources objects that run in parallel, and the other ones are. Well, no, you won't have any parallel is the point, because if you have to have all, basically what you have to do is you need to get and this is a temporary problem until the plugins are upgraded. But if you're using an external plugin, and again, the example I have in OpenShift side is we have an OpenShift plugin that we use with OADP in addition to the Velero internal plugins. If I update OADP to use this new version of Velero, and we don't upgrade our plugin to use v3, then we're not going to be able to get the multi-threaded backup. But if we modify our plugins by adding the new function and register it as a v3 plugin, then we do get all that functionality. But the issue is you need all of your plugins having the new functionality. I mean, I had several conversations with Sean about this. We were trying to work around this because it's kind of a pain early on until, but the problem is you don't have the information you need to guarantee that the items are together, which means you could end up messing up your backup because you're backing up some things in parallel that depend on each other, not being done that way. So, but it's definitely a kind of a bootstrapping temporary thing until, users, their plugins can be upgraded. Just like with, and I know when we have a new version of Velero that comes out, we tell users pretty much immediately, you need to use the new AWS plugin, you need to use the CSI plugin that goes with this, because if you use the old one, all the functionality is not going to necessarily work the way you expect it to. And this basically is the same thing. If you're using some external, not supported by Velero directly plugin, that's going to need to get upgraded in order to be able to make use of this functionality.
For example, we for the Velero own BI plugins, we have upgraded all of them to BI v3, and now everything just working.
So everything inside the Velero repo is that's part of this phase 1 task, is updating all those plugins.
Once some user just take another plugin that is not owned by Velero,
right,
into the installation, and now everything will be changed. Everything will go back to the sequential way. Even though all of Velero's plugin are BIV3 and can run in the parallel way. Right.
But because we can no longer guarantee that we captured all those relationships, which means we can no longer guarantee the integrity of the backup. So we have to, when we start doing things in parallel, that's kind of a dangerous thing to do unless we're sure we've captured all those relationships. So if they're adding third-party plugins that aren't following the new API, we can no longer guarantee that we have those relationships. And so it really it means that our confidence in the backup, if we tried to do this anyway without that information, would be much lower.
And the other similar problem is like, even though I have a BI, and even though I don't want to I don't want to back up my items in parallel, and I cannot stay with BIV2 because if I stay with BIV2, every others will not be able to take advantage of BIV3, right?
Well, if your Velero installation, you don't want to run things in parallel, that's configurable. There's a field to set for that, to set it to set one worker, and then it's if you have one worker, then everything is going to be backed up sequentially, just like now, in terms of what order things get backed up in. So that's going to be a configurable thing. So it'll be a server parameter to be able to set the number of workers for backing up items. For users that don't want to have their backups in parallel, that can be set as a server parameter.
Actually, the things like I don't want my items to back up in parallel, but I don't want to affect the other ones. But if I don't upgrade to BIV3, I will affect the other ones, because the current design require all the running BIs to go with BIV3.
I think just choosing to use an old API as a method of saying I don't want parallel is really a bad user. That's not a good API to have. So if there's a requirement to be able to say, hey, I want to not do things in parallel, I don't think use the old API is the way to do that.
That is mostly for the compatibility consideration, because I don't know how many BIs are there for Velero. We know how many of Velero own ones, but we don't know how many for other ones from.
Right. I mean that fallback is a compatibility thing. It's because if you're mixing two different modes, V2 and V3, and we know that for V3 to work based on the way it's designed, you have to have complete information and everything. To some degree, falling back to using the V2 API is a compatibility mode. It's a way of saying, okay, V2 is the level that all of my plugins are compatible, so that's what I'm going to use. And once all of those get upgraded to V3, then V3 becomes the compatible level, and then you can use that.
This is understandable, and this is a pattern, right? This is a pattern. The current design just defining, and this is understandable. But I think I'm not sure. I see you have made some comments about this approach, and will read it out and
Yeah.
think it about.
Yeah.
But I think
yeah, I mean,
this
the thing though
approach.
there is that you were suggesting if things were additional items were returned, we make it a new item. But the whole point of additional items is those need to belong to this block. They need to be done here because that's the meaning of the additional items. The problem is once you don't get to execute until you're already running that backup. So at that point, you've already started potentially backing that other thing up in another thread, and it's too late to say it's part of this block. And so again, we've split things up, and now things are being run in parallel when they should have been run sequentially. Because by the time we get to execute, it's too late to make those decisions. We've already broken the items into blocks and sent them off to the workers.
Yeah, I basically understand the problem you are mentioning, and but I will read all the comments later offline, and let's just further think about them, and I think the current even I don't know I don't know all of the details, but think it about so the how say the think about it simply. I think this way may be may solve the compatibility problem, and may also solve the to make the code simple, and for example, we don't need to keep more some logic for falling back to BIV2. Just a very simple ideas, but maybe it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think the problem is that I think that does the wrong thing, because when you say additional item returned by execute, we make that a separate block. But the whole point is that needs to be in the current block, because when an item returns an additional item, so let's take a specific example. Pod plugin. Let's assume the pod plugin was still V2 and we forgot to upgrade it. The pod plugin returns a PVC saying, hey, this PVC goes with this pod. Please back this up here too. So that needs to be in the current block, because the pod hook runs, then we back up the pod and the PVC, and then the post hook runs. So if we didn't have that, that new V3 method that returned the PVC for the pod, then we wouldn't know that. We might be already starting to run the backup of the PVC in another thread. And so we've already broken hooks now, because we've already started backing up the volume before the pod's done, or before what was separate from the pod. So it could be before or after, but either way you can mess with the hooks. You might start backing up the volume too soon, or the pod might think it's done and run the post hooks before the volume is done backing up. So that's why we really need to have that information for everything. And the other thing about this is that when we get the additional items returned from execute, that's in the existing code of backup item. That's code that's not, that code is mostly going to be, unchanged from the way it is now. So it doesn't have a reference to a block at that point. It just has the item. So that's code that, trying to mess with the V2, V3 stuff at that point might also add complexity as well. I think basically the thing is that the complexity is actually for the fallback should be pretty straightforward. At the beginning, when we get a list of plugins, we can get a list of V3 plugins, a list of V2 plugins, we compare them. So if they're matches, we're good, we can use V3. If there's not matches, then we run in compatibility mode. We just set a Boolean, here, and basically if we're in compatibility mode, then we skip calling additional items. So that just means there's an if block. So this loop that goes through all the items recursively down to generate this block doesn't run. So we just have a single item in the block. And the only other change we have to make for this compatibility mode is when we're starting the worker threads. So when we start the controller up, we only create one if we're in compatibility mode. So those are the only two places we really need to make changes for the V2 fallback. Because everything else can go through the new code. It's just that when you call backup item block, you pass in a block with one item in it, and then you wait, and then only one is happening at a time. So we're not having to maintain two totally different workflows, and the old workflow and the new workflow. We're using the new workflow, but we're restricting the options of how it's executed in compatibility mode, so that we have plugins that have not been upgraded present. That way we can have the same level of confidence in the integrity of the backup as we do now.
Okay, let me think about it later
Okay.
offline. But one quick question for this one. I think you as I think your comment you said this have been solved, right? That basically about the BI cannot to
Yeah,
return.
so there's two different, I guess I'm gonna just to back up a second to kind of explain what's going on. There's two different ways that we use additional items. In some cases, the pod plugin is a good example of this. The items are already there. The pod and the PVC are already in that list from the item collector. The pod plugin returns the PVC saying, I need this now. And that's why when we have in the single threaded mode, we go through and pods are first and then PVCs, because all the pods that all the PVCs that belong to pods get backed up with the pods. And then when we get to PVCs later, those are the disconnected ones. So basically, the additional items that already exist, the PVC is a good example of that. Those would be returned in the executed just like it now, but also in the pre-processing, get additional items. And we need that in that pre-processing. So when we go through, we can say, okay, this PVC is already included in this block. So we're not going to make a separate call to it later. But in the case where we create a new item, and a good example of that is in the CSI plugin, where the PVC plugin creates a volume snapshot and returns that as an additional item. That volume snapshot doesn't exist when we get the list of items from the item collector. So we can't include that in the pre-processing because it doesn't exist. But we don't need that there because since it doesn't exist, it's not in the item collector list. So it's not going to be in any of those blocks. So when the PVC plugin returns that additional item, it's a new item, just got created. So it's not in any other block. But the code that already exists in backup item, the single item backup, we go through, we call the backup item actions. We make the changes to those make the changes to the YAML. Then we get those additional items. The way the backup item code works, it then at that point calls backup item recursively on what was returned.
Okay.
And because we're keeping, and there's another comment about the backup items map. There's a map we keep listing all items by their namespace name, and it's a resource identifier. So we can guarantee that we never back up something twice, because it's possible that two different plugins both say, hey, I need this item. The first one that returns it is the one that ends up backing it up. But we don't want to back it up multiple times. The example of that one in the current code would be again in the CSI plugin, another thing that's returned, I believe, by the volume snapshot plugin, but it might be PVC. But anyway, no, it's volume snapshot. The volume snapshot plugin creates volume snapshot content. That's a new item and returns it. It also references the volume snapshot class that's relevant and returns that. So if you have two volumes, two different plugins two different items actions are going to return that volume snapshot class. But because we have that map where we're tracking what items we backed up, the first time we back it up, that does it. Everything else, it's handled already. We can ignore it from that point forward. And the only thing we need to do, and Angela pointed out, we already actually have a GitHub issue for this. We need to make that map thread safe, synchronize access to it, so that when different threads are accessing this, we make sure that it's still thread safe, and that should solve that problem. So there shouldn't be any breaking change there. The other comment, I think it was relating, might have been further down on this one, was, the question was, why, if we're already returning it with get additional items, why do we still need to return it and execute? And at first I was thinking, okay, maybe we don't need that, and kind of thinking through, I gave an example where that would probably still work. But Sean pointed out to me that if we stop returning those items and execute, we're breaking backwards compatibility, which is, we were concerned earlier about V2 plugins running in a V3 Velero, but backwards compatibility for external plugins goes the opposite direction. If I have if I'm a user, a plugin writer, and I register my plugin as V2 and V3, expecting it'll work in versions of Velero that support V2 only, and also in newer versions with V3. But if I remove those additional items from the V2, from the plugin, then my plugin is no longer going to run on a version of Velero that's V2 only. So that breaks backwards compatibility. If we just say, look, you need to return the same items in both, the way to do this is to use a helper method internally that gets called by both and returns it. Then we've covered the backwards compatibility concern as well. Yeah, so I had some comments here where I was kind of agreeing that I thought we could do that, but then further down, I added a comment saying I think actually we probably need to just do make sure the user still return the full list to preserve backwards compatibility. I mean, these are just guidelines to plugin authors. If the plugin author chooses not to do that, it's kind of on them. If they say, "Hey, I'm never going to use this in a V2 plugin. I don't care about this," and they just write it that way, it's going to be against our guidelines. But Velero's not going to know the difference. We're going to recommend they don't do that. But it'll probably still work if they do.
Yeah. So the principle is like if additional item is already existing there, we need to return from that additional item and also the attribute.
Exactly.
If doesn't exist, we can only it's okay to return it from attribute only. So right. What about this scenario? I'm not sure if it is real one or just from my imagination. Like we already have the item, some item 1A, B, and C, but before the backup, my BI doesn't know which one I should return, A, B, or C. I don't know. So I have to return A or B or C from my execute function call. I think this will not be supported.
It depends on usually. And I was trying to look at the plugins that we have internally to see, and also in the OpenShift ones to see kind of what we normally look at, and it looks like as long as we pass in the item, the details, the same unstructured content into the item, because in most cases the item itself is going to tell you what you need. If it's a pod, you're going to look at the pod spec and you're going to say, oh, here's a section for volumes. Here's a PVC. I know I need that PVC. That's the way the pod plugin works. And there may be some cases where you have to, some plugin might be making some external call, like might make an API call saying, is there a secret with this, label on it or something? Maybe, but I think in any case, as long as the API that we define passes into the get additional items the same backup and item YAML that we pass in to execute, then we should have most of the same information available to make that decision. In most cases, it's going to be based on the content of the item itself, but there may be other cases where it's based on something else, something in the cluster, looking up a config map. But as long as the API that we define gives basically the same information to both functions, they should have the same ability to generate that item A, B, or C, or whatever the right item is. Yeah, if you look at in the design for the API that's I defined for additional items, I believe I included the same. You have a reference to the backup and you have a reference to the item content.
Okay. Okay. So conclusively, we need to make some new guidelines for the writing of the new BIs.
Oh, we absolutely need some documentation as part of this for users. How to update to, and not just even. I mean, we're going to need to actually kind of cover V2 and V3, because the thing is that V2 added some new functions to the plugin. Or one, yeah, because the progress and things relating to the async work, and so plugins that didn't need that just stay to V1. One of the consequences to going to V3 is if everyone has to go to V3, that means all of our plugins are going to have to define these other functions. They're going to be empty for the most part. If the internal pod plugin is a good example again, that just returns the PVC. That doesn't have any async actions. So the progress function is going to be empty. But it does have to define the function. It just does nothing because of the way the RPC interface works. You have to define all of the functions as part of the API. You know, if we were doing this in Java, we could just inherit it and ignore it, but we're not. So we have to actually, you know, implement empty functions for these things. But that's something we can, again, in this user document saying, okay, to go to V3, you must define these functions and basically list all the ones in both in V2 and V3 that weren't in V1 and point out for users that don't need anything special in there, leave them blank. For a plugin that just modifies content and doesn't return any additional items, that function is just going to return nothing. It's going to be, you know, stub. They can just copy it straight out of the documentation as to what they need to do to make the change.
So Scott,
yeah.
This one.
Oh, so I was saying so in terms of what a plugin author needs to do to upgrade their plugins to V3, for anything that doesn't have additional items, they really just need to copy in the boilerplate. If there's additional items, that's where the bulk of the work is. They have to actually make sure those match up. That's going to require some explanation in the docs. And then when they register the plugin, they're going to need to do register, you know, backup item action V3 instead of V1 or V2. But yeah, we absolutely need a user-facing doc as part of the, you know, as part of this, as to explain to plugin writers, you know, what they need to change.
So Scott, so I have an overall comment. Because currently many of us are busy with, you know, the 1.14 development work.
Yep.
So I expect this PR to be open for a relatively long time, and the more discussion will happen, maybe even after we reach FC. Is that okay to you?
I think, I mean, we're not doing any implementation, but for 1.14, so I think this is a big functionality change. It makes sense to take our time and get it right. My only concern, and I will mention it here, I see that we already have 2 reviews. This is great. You know, an ongoing review process is a good thing. What I don't want to see happen is, you know, we get caught up in everything and forget about it, and all of a sudden, oh, 1.14 is out, and I'm supposed to be writing this code for 1.15, and I don't have an approved design yet. So that's my biggest concern is by the time 1.14 is out and we're ready to start implementing 1.15, I'd like this to be the point where we have an approved design.
Okay.
I don't expect it to get approved this week.
But then, yeah.
And I know we're all busy, you know, and we need to kind of balance that properly. So I think as long as we can kind of continue to make progress on this, kind of, you know, bring up issues, we try to address issues. If there's issues that need to make a change, I'll update the doc. There was one comment that I definitely need to update the doc to expand on it. There was a question about, because I mentioned a brief sentence about how we needed a go routine for collecting the response from, you know, from the workers. And so there was a question about that. And I think I just need to include an example, kind of a simplified example of what it might look like, because I'm looking at some other controller code that has similar, you know, worker models using the same pattern. So I just need to include in the design a kind of a stub example of what I think that, because basically what it needs to do is it needs to collect the response back, you know, the return value from the backup item block action, and it's also got to track, okay, we now, you know, there were 500 items, we've now received 500 responses. The channel, you know, using a weight group or something like that, so that, okay, we now know that we have all the responses. That's closed. Let's move on. So that's kind of the function of that wait for response go routine. But it's kind of hard to understand that from just a brief sentence in the design. So I'm gonna go back and add kind of a simplified code example of what it might look like.
Yeah, I haven't read through the design, but based on the discussion between you and Yunhui, I'm a little concerned about the complexity it's gonna introduce. So my concern is that we may continuously making progress, but it may or may not be a very general consensus or agreement in terms of implementation, which may impact we make change in 1.15. My gut feeling is that may happen.
What exactly may happen?
I mean, we may making a lot of discussion here, but we may not have a agreement even when 1.14 RC or later. That may happen, right? Because I see there's supposed to be more disagreement here based on the comments and the discussion between Yonghui and Scott just now.
I mean, my hope would be as these things come up, we can kind of work through and say, okay, here's a disagreement, and because I think just in the past when like I think a good example of this is with the Shubham's work with his the backup volume policy. Some of the review comments and the disagreement came down to kind of fully explaining the model and here's what we're doing. Some of those disagreements, especially early on, actually had implementation changes, and there were requests, actually we should do it a little bit different way, let's talk about that, and then I made changes and then that got reviewed. And so I think again, pretty much every time we have these discussions, some of them are going to be a question of, a comment is, hey, we should do something, or why are we doing it this way? Sometimes that gets resolved by explaining here's why it needs to be done this way, doing it a different way doesn't work, and here's why. Other cases, you get a disagreement and you say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's explore that. Let's find a way, see if that works, if that helps this. And so, ultimately, those things get resolved. I don't know. Obviously, there's always a risk that you don't come to an agreement at a certain point. But at some point, if you have a new feature that you need to get in and you want to, it adds functionality that's really been kind of a long time coming. If it takes a little bit longer to get an agreement, just so that we're all on the same page, that's fine.
Right.
But at the same time, we want to make sure that we don't get so bogged down in less important details. And that's another thing that I think we need to be willing to do. For some of the things that come up is, for example, there was Anshul had a comment about, do we want to consider making the internal backup item actions not use RPC? Maybe it's more efficient than, that's a discussion we can have. I think that's a separate design. Let's handle that offline or as a completely different discussion, because we may not need to do that. If we do need to do that, that doesn't affect this design because it's really kind of a separate concern that doesn't impact this code. So I think when we have some of those kinds of disagreements, it's good to kind of declare them, non-goals, make a separate issue for those, and address those, longer term.
And GA is roughly 2 months out. Is that correct?
No, I think it's going to be in May 1.14.
Yeah, roughly 2 months.
I don't quite understand what you mean by roughly 2 months, because every minor release, based on the experience we have, we have 3 minor releases a year. So are you talking about 1.14 or generally?
Well, no, we have roughly 2 months time between 1.14 is released from today.
If it's at the end of May, it's a little bit less than 2 months from now. If it's
less
middle
than 2 months, correct.
So maybe 6 weeks to say 6 to 8 weeks from now. I think it's kind of what.
Yeah, probably the plan is GA 1.14 around May 23. Like
yeah,
that.
that's what I'm saying, with maybe a
so
potential
6 weeks,
1 or
7
2
weeks
week
from now.
clip. So instead of setting up the community for potential failure in saying that I don't foresee us all reaching consensus on a design like this, what I would prefer to see is the things that we can reach consensus on in this particular design, trying to get those merged in. And maybe there are some unanswered questions and a follow-up design PR that we can address in 1.15's time frame, so that we are not completely blocking the implementation in 1.15. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, but yeah, I need to read through the design, but based on the discussion with Yonghui and Scott, I think there may be some fundamental disagreement, like how do we handle the old version of plugins. So I Yeah.
I mean, I think
I
you're right
agree.
that there are some issues that are going to come up that you're going to have to get nailed down now because everything else, depends on that.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of part of what I was saying earlier too, is that, for those issues, that probably should be our focus, over the next 6 weeks. If we can work through those fundamental issues and agree to them. If there are some details, especially details around phase 2, that's something we can
Sure.
address later, because phase 2 is not going to be implemented until a bit longer anyway. So I would say
Yeah.
plugin API changes is something we want to focus on probably first. How we're handling go routines and all that, we need to figure it out, but that's phase 2. So if we can get even everything in phase 1 agreed to by the end of 1.14, that lets us start implementing phase 1 while we're still hammering out maybe some details in phase 2 if necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it may be that phase 2 is less controversial, and by the time we get phase 1 worked out where we all agree, that's fine too. So I'm not saying split it up now. I'm just saying let's focus primarily on some of those fundamental issues that everything builds on, because I'm hopeful that if we, obviously we can't focus just on this because we still have to write code and get 1.14 out the door, and that's clearly the priority. No disagreement there. But I think if we can kind of hack away at these disagreements and kind of work through them over the next few weeks, I think we can get to a point where when we're ready to start doing 1.15 development, we can be at a point where at least some of this we can implement.
Okay.
Okay. Let's continue the discussion for this PR offline. And yeah. And next one, Shichi, please.
Yeah, I was working on enhancing the restore execution hooks, and the PR for it is under review. That's it.
Okay, thanks. And so, Daniel, do you have any update? I think you have added the
yeah, sorry, John,
right?
Yeah. So I think the FC gonna delay 1 or 2 weeks. So we're gonna check later in today's meeting internally and share more information. But my general feeling is that we may be 1 or 2 week. There may be a 1 or 2 delay for the FC. So it's gonna be between maybe in the week of April 20, I think. In that week, we're gonna reach FC if everything goes well, considering there are some code change under review and some of them may have conflicts, so we may need more buffer to reach the FC. That's all. And for my development work, I'm working on the implementation of the restore volume info. Currently, I have a draft PR and adding UT to it and expect it to be merged soon.
Okay, thanks. And now for the discussion topics, we have one from Shugang. So Shugang, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask whether we agree with introduction of a new parameter mentioned in this comment. Could you open that up? Yeah.
I don't think we need a parameter. I think it's okay to have a
hard-coded.
Yeah, hard-coded value, but the question is, do we really need to fix it? I think for every failure, it can be intermittent. It can be fixed, be retry. We don't want to add a retry everywhere. So I don't know why for this case, it's especially important for adding a retry.
So our QE infra has seen this issue consistently reproduced in their environment, and VSC, we already do something similar for volume snapshot plugin, right? Then why not do something similar for VSC plugin?
So what's the reason it's like repeatedly reproduced?
So it is because of the external snapshotter being working on the VSC, right? External snapshotter controller working on VSC. It sometimes takes time to be in ready state, and the backup is getting failed before that itself. So that's a temporary error on which the backup shouldn't fail.
Yeah, I understand in
Yeah.
general, but the detail, I think I need to read through it to
Sure.
really understand. But generally, I don't think we need a parameter here because the user may not have an idea what's the ideal value for it. So why don't we have a
hard code? I agree with the hard coded approach. Maybe Daniel, you could add a comment once you review the discussion thread.
Sure. And by the way, because Shun is working on merging the CSI plugin into the Velero repo, so the change has to be made after that PR is merged, and in truth, that will happen in the Velero repo.
I was gonna come to that.
Okay.
Maybe if we are doing a hard coded change, that can be added in that PR itself. I don't know.
I would say make a separate PR just because.
Okay. Just for
because the idea is let's take what's currently in the CSI plugin, bring it into the Rain repo, and I think just from the point of view of trying to follow the development progress, let's limit that PR to just moving from one repo to another. That way it's easy to follow the changes.
Makes sense. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I may talk to you offline to better understand the detail of this particular error.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. I think we have go through all the items. Anything else we want to update here? Okay. Then I think we can finish the meeting here today. Thanks for joining. Have a good day and good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.